Thank you, Elder McDonald, for your blessing this morning. Good morning and welcome. On behalf of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corp, thank you, Grand Chief Billy Morin, and for the community of Enoch for welcoming us here this morning. We'd also like to acknowledge that we're gathering on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting ground and traveling route of the Cree, Saulteaux, Sioux, Blackfoot, Métis, and Dene. I also want to extend a sincere thank you to Premier Kenney, Minister Wilson, Associate Minister Nally, and MLA Long, who are all with us today. We're here today because of the visionary leadership that established the AIOC. The overarching mandate of the AIOC is to bolster Indigenous access to capital and participation in the economy. We do so by way of loan guarantees and capacity grants to support Indigenous investment and ownership in commercially viable mid to large-scale natural resource projects and related infrastructure. Only 11 months ago, the AIOC was created, and today we're pleased to announce that a $93 million loan guarantee has been extended in support of 6 Alberta First Nations as they gain partnership and a material ownership stake in the Cascade Power Project. I want to respectfully acknowledge the Indigenous leaders and the representatives that are present today from the 6 First Nations, specifically Grand Chief Billy Morin of Enoch, Cree, Chief Tony Alexis of Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation, Chief Vernon Watchmaker of Kehewin, Chief Douglas Beaverbones of Ochese First Nation, and Chief Tom Poole of Goodfish Whitefish Lake First Nation. Without your vision, your leadership, and your trust, we would not be gathered here today. Cascade is a 900 megawatt, highly efficient natural gas-fired power facility being constructed near Edson. This infrastructure asset will provide tangible benefits to the 6 participating First Nations for the next 30 years. The powerful echo effect of Indigenous ownership in natural resource projects include Indigenous skills development, employment, and capacity building. But also very importantly, ownership itself fosters a mindset and a legacy of prosperity and future-mindedness for the youth and adult members of the nations involved. We do not underestimate the power of that shift in thinking and what it will mean for the 6 First Nations. We also know that Indigenous ownership and meaningful participation in the economy will attract greater economic development opportunities for Alberta and drive our broader economy and prosperity for all. Together, we create win-win initiatives. And this is why we are all so proud and pleased to be making this announcement together today. Today marks the beginning of a new era of Indigenous partnerships and economic development that the AIOC is profoundly proud to support. With that, I would like to invite Premier Jason Kenney to make his remarks.
Thank you so much, Alicia, and it's so great to have you as the new Chief Executive Officer of Alberta's Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. Thank you, Grand Chief Morin, to you and your whole community here at the Enoch First Nation for welcoming us to your facility on your reserve, on your traditional land, and thank you to all of the chiefs, and thank you, Elder, for opening us with that lovely prayer and reflection, and thank you to all of the chiefs and elders who are with us. To Chief Alexis, Chief Watchmaker, Chief Poole, to Paul Posent of Backwoods Energy Services, to the Chair of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, Cody Church, and I see Indigenous Services Minister Rick Wilson. It's hard to recognize everybody here behind the masks. We also have Minister for Natural Gas and Electricity, Dale Nally, and MLA Martin Long, and I'm sorry if I'm missing anybody. Thank you all for being here for a real red letter day. This is a great day for Alberta and for Indigenous communities in our province. This is an historic moment, an announcement heralding a major advance of Indigenous investment and partnership in the development of Alberta's natural resource sector. I'm pleased to be back here on the Enoch First Nation. In fact, I was just here last night having dinner with Chief Billy and others. And I was here actually for an announcement earlier in the summer. Our last get-together here was in July for the big announcement about the Government of Alberta's partnership with Ottawa and Alberta First Nations in our billion-dollar site rehabilitation program to clean up thousands of abandoned oil and gas wells and related sites. It's the biggest oil patch rehabilitation project in Canadian history, and it's creating thousands of jobs all over our province, including for Indigenous Albertans by First Nation-owned contractors. Those jobs are helping to bring down the province's unemployment rate from over 15% earlier this year, when we were hammered by the pandemic-driven global economic shutdown and the resulting crash in oil prices. The August job numbers that came in last week pegged Alberta's current unemployment rate at 11.8%. It's still way too high, but it is progress, and it remains one of the highest rates of joblessness in the country. Still, the bold, ambitious recovery plan that we launched in June to create jobs immediately and build, diversify, and set Alberta's economy on a path for a return to long-term growth and prosperity is gaining momentum. We're embarking on a recovery built to last because it will combine the revitalization of our traditional economic strengths in areas like energy, agriculture, and petrochemicals and other resource-based sectors. It's combining those things with increased diversification in fast-growing industries powered by advanced technologies and expansion of our huge undeveloped potential in areas like tourism, aviation, and financial services. This year, we are, on top of all of that, rolling out an infrastructure bill, the largest infrastructure bill in Alberta history, with $10 billion in projects that are moving Albertans from unemployment to good jobs. Right now, building roads, bridges, overpasses, water projects, pipelines, gas lines, schools, hospitals, long-term care homes and seniors' homes, and addiction treatment and recovery centers. All of this will spur the creation of an estimated 50,000 jobs and tens of thousands more knock-on jobs with subcontractors and suppliers, small businesses, hotels like this one, and restaurants in every corner of the province. A lot of these projects are happening on First Nations. In late July, for example, I was honored to be at Standoff to announce a $5 million investment to create 75 beds at a new addiction treatment and recovery center on the Big Blood Reserve. In the short term, that project will create some badly needed jobs for the Kainai, but it's also a long-term investment in Alberta's human capital, the single most important element of our future economic growth and success. One of our province's biggest competitive advantages is that we have the youngest population in Canada. And the youngest demographic within our young province is the Indigenous community. Young Indigenous Albertans are increasingly well represented throughout our economy, in business, the trades, the professions, in both the private and government sectors. More and more are achieving academic success, seizing opportunities to excel in every field of human endeavor, and building strong families within strong, healthy communities. What we're witnessing here in Alberta, especially in communities like Enoch and several other First Nations that are engaged in the energy sector and other natural resource development on or near their lands, what we are witnessing is the long overdue Indigenous liberation from unemployment and poverty, which must be the moral cause of our time and our generation. It is one of the most exciting social and economic developments of our time, and it points not just to a better future for coming generations of Indigenous people, but to a fairer, a more equitable, and a more united province, and a better future for all of us. You see, I believe that the full participation of Indigenous people in our entire economy should be the ultimate goal and achievement of reconciliation, or as Blood Chief Roy Fox calls it, reconciliation. And that is what brings us here today. I am very pleased to announce the first ever investment by Alberta First Nations in a major resource project backed by Alberta's Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. 6 First Nations, the Alexis, Nakota, Sioux, and great to see you, Chief Tony Alexis, the Enoch, Cree, Kehewin, Whitefish Lake, Ochis, and the Paul First Nations are partnering with OP Trust, one of Canada's biggest pension funds, which manages $22 billion in assets for the Government of Ontario and the Ontario Public Services Employees Union, to invest $93 million in the Cascade Power Project, a $1.5 billion natural gas-fired power plant being built near Edson. This is the first Aboriginal equity investment in an Alberta resource project backstopped by the faith and credit of the Alberta Crown through a loan guarantee issued by the new Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, AIOC. This 900-watt state-of-the-art power plant will meet 8% of Alberta's total electricity needs when it's commissioned. Construction begins immediately, and I know was announced recently, and will be completed by the fall of 2023. The project is expected to create 600 jobs during peak construction, and more than 25 long-term operational jobs, and this is including construction and operational jobs for skilled Indigenous workers employed by First Nations contractors. Natural gas to fuel the plant will come from northwestern Alberta's prolific local gas fields, and this is good news for our natural gas industry, more domestic demand and consumption of that clean energy source. The project accelerates the decarbonization of Alberta's power grid by switching from coal to natural gas on a market basis. Our government's not forcing that. These are market choices being made. A market in which First Nations are now full participants with a seat at the table. And once operational, the power plant is expected to reduce Alberta's carbon emissions from energy production by up to 5%. Between the job creation benefits and all the environmental benefits, plus the safe, reliable, and affordable power benefits for Albertans, there are so many wins here it's hard to count. But here's the icing on the cake. Revenues for the First Nations investors in the Cascade Power Plant are forecast to total hundreds of millions of dollars over the 30 years of the project. Congratulations to everyone involved in putting together this historic deal. And it was a deal. It wasn't easy, it wasn't straightforward, it took a lot of back and forth. But the chiefs who led this project and the AIOC board and executive worked through this and found a solution that ensures a reasonable level of risk for taxpayers and a reasonable level of equity and cash flow for the First Nations. It's a win-win. I especially want to thank and congratulate Alicia Dubois, who started us off here, for getting the AIOC off to such a great start. Obviously, Alicia's extensive background in Indigenous financial services, she comes to us having run the Indigenous financing program for one of the country's largest banks, and her lifelong commitment to Indigenous economic progress is reflected in the nation-spanning partnership assembled for this project. And let me say, I had a wonderful chance with friends to have dinner with Alicia last night to learn that she's from Algonquin background, came out here with her family where her dad worked as a tradesman up in the oil sands in Fort McMurray, knows how to drive big trucks, has a post-secondary education in science and law, and is passionate about Indigenous economic development. And we are so fortunate to have a woman of her caliber stepping up to this leadership role, aren't we? Please give her a hand. So I know this is just the beginning. And let me pause to say that it was in March of last year where in this room, together with Grand Chief Morin, I announced the intention of my government in the last election to create an Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation to help facilitate Indigenous co-ownership and financial participation in major resource projects so that Indigenous Albertans could benefit fully from the resource wealth that lies below the ground that their ancestors first inhabited, to help move their people from poverty to prosperity and opportunity and a bright future. And it is so exciting for me to see that dream and that vision being realized in a real, concrete way here today. Today's announcement heralds a new beginning for the Canadian energy and resources industry. These sectors have been held back and pinned down for the last several years by hostile policies constraining the development of new projects and pipelines on behalf of foreign-funded special interests. Typically, those interests claim to be speaking on behalf of Indigenous people, but nothing could be further from the truth. These actions are contrary to the economic interests of Indigenous people in this province. They are reminiscent of the paternalism that haunts our shared history, and they have no place in the 21st century. As former Chief Counselor of the Haisla First Nation, Ellis Ross, says, this is eco-colonialism, and we will not stand for it in Alberta. The chiefs gathered here today, and indeed the vast majority of the First Nations of Alberta and Western Canada, recognize that the economic history and destiny of their people lies in the prudent and responsible stewardship of the natural resources that lie on and below their traditional lands. The crushing impacts of the COVID pandemic and the oil price crash has been devastating for all of us. But I'm glad to see there's good business happening here in the hotel, Billy, and I think that's a good sign for your community. An economic recovery built to last for all of us will inevitably involve the revitalization of Canada's natural resources industry to meet the national and global demand for energy and resource products that are produced under the world's strictest environmental, social, and governance standards. So thanks again to everyone who helped to get us to this historic day, and I look forward to many more exciting announcements about Indigenous economic development through the AIOC in the future, because together we are stronger. Hi, hi. Thank you very much.